One of the problematic issues of our day, and I'm not yet prepared to say it's a hoax, is the issue of the Common Core. I don't know whether it's good or it's bad, and when it was first started back in 2009 or a little earlier, I said to them, as you do this, be sure and field test it, because you'll learn a lot if you do it in real classrooms with real teachers and real children. And they said, well, we're in a hurry, we won't have time to do that. So then in 2010, I was invited to come to a small meeting at the White House, and they said, well, we have the Common Core, it's now written, what do you think of it? And I said, standards are words on paper until you've actually tried them in a classroom with real children. Field test it. And they said, we don't have time for that. So I'm left wondering, and I stayed on the fence for a long time, and then earlier this spring I wrote a blog called, I Can't Support the Common Core. They've never been tested. I don't believe in introducing a product that has never been tested and foisting it on the entire country at the same time without any field test. How do you know what effect it will have? Will it drive down the scores of children who are struggling? Will it help them or will it hurt them? We don't know. But we're beginning to find out as the tests are starting. New York State gave its Common Core test just this past spring, and we found out that only 5% of the children with disabilities passed the test. Only about 15% of the children who were English learners passed the test. The test statewide dropped from about 60% to 30%. And parents didn't blame their schools. They didn't blame their teachers. They said, damn this Common Core, damn this test, this is stupid. Why are you testing our kids on material they've never been taught? The teachers don't have the material, there's no curriculum, the teachers don't know what to expect, the kids don't know what to expect. This is ridiculous. So it's actually turned out to be a pretty good thing, because Common Core testing in New York State is building a tremendous anti-testing movement. So it's not all bad. So one of the things that I can say is for certain a hoax is the notion that the very best teachers are people who have just graduated college and gotten 5 weeks of training. Now, the idea is that if you're lucky enough to pay to bring one of these inexperienced, ill-trained teachers into your school, they're better even than experienced teachers. The problem is that when you buy this hoax, you destroy teaching as a profession, because you persuade the American public that no particular professional preparation is necessary, experience is not necessary, anyone can teach. I was quite amazed yesterday or last night to read an editorial written by a member of the Harvard Crimson saying that she urged her classmates, she was class of 14, she said, do not join Teach for America. It not only will send you into a classroom unprepared to teach, it's destroying American public education. I'll have none of it. Now, another of the hoaxes of our time is the belief that students will get higher test scores if their teachers are offered merit pay. Our corporate reformers believe that teachers are longing, of course every teacher wants to be paid, but what the reformers don't recognize is that merit pay is not a new idea. It's a very old idea. It's been tried for well over 100 years. It has never, ever worked. But no matter how many times it's failed, they continue to have faith that the next time it will work. They'll find a different way to design the plan and it will work. So there was a very elaborate test designed by an economist at Vanderbilt University in Nashville a few years ago. They offered one group of teachers a bonus of $15,000 if they could raise the scores, and they had a control group that was offered nothing. And at the end of 3 years, they found that both groups had exactly the same test scores in their classes. And I thought it was fairly obvious why this was true, and that is that both groups of teachers were doing the best they knew how. They didn't know how to do any better. The people who believe in merit pay believe that teachers are hiding their best lessons, waiting for someone to offer them a bonus. And when the bonus comes out, they'll say, aha, now I'm really going to teach. But the worst of all the hoaxes is the one that I mentioned at the outset, and that is the one that you hear again and again from, whether it's from Bill Gates or Arnie Duncan or Michelle Rhee or Joel Klein, and that is, ignore poverty, it's just an excuse for bad teachers. Good teachers can teach everybody and get excellent results from every student. And this is a way of saying, ignore the fact that the top 10% of people in the income bracket, top 10% of income earn more than 50% of everybody else in the country. Ignore the fact that there is greater income inequality in this country than we have seen in 100 years. We didn't have records before 100 years ago. We're back to the age of the robber barons. And what we should be talking about, instead of dismissing poverty and saying it's unimportant, we should be talking about restructuring the tax code. And I have a couple of chapters in the book in which I describe, using research, but you don't need research to know this, you only need your common sense, that poverty hurts kids. Being hungry hurts kids. Not having adequate medical care hurts kids. Not knowing if you have a meal on the table at night hurts kids. Living in a neighborhood that's violent where you have seen people killed hurts kids. It distracts them. There are all kinds of reasons why poverty hurts kids. And to say it is just an excuse is cruel and inhumane. So another of the hoaxes of our time is the belief that, and you hear this often expressed, frequently in your own Boston Globe, charters and vouchers will save poor kids from failing schools. Well, I've been hearing this now for 20 years, and for 20 years it's not been true, but there's always tomorrow. In the charter research, we know that there are some charters that get high test scores. We know some that get very low test scores. We know also that on average, charters don't get different test scores unless they're skimming off the best kids and kicking out the kids that they don't want. The thing that you should know about charters, and I describe this in the book, is they like to call themselves public when it's time to get the money, but when they get into any kind of legal trouble, suddenly they're not public anymore. And there are a number of instances of this. And there was a case out west where a teacher in a charter school he said he was libeled by the school, and the school wouldn't allow him to get a job anywhere else because any future employer was sent information that he said was false. So he sued them in federal court, and the charter's response was, you can't sue us, we're not a public school, we're a private corporation that has a contract with the government. So the case went all the way up to the Federal Appeals Court, and the Federal Appeals Court ruled, it's true, the charter is not a public school, it is a private corporation. Then there was an instance in Chicago where teachers wanted to organize into a union, and the charter's founder said, you cannot organize, we're not subject to state labor law, we are not a public school, we're a private corporation. The National Labor Relations Board agreed, the charter school is not a public school. More recently, there was a case just a few weeks ago in Los Angeles where a married couple who had founded a very high-performing charter school, it was a charter school devoted to entrepreneurship, were charged with having misappropriated $200,000. They were very entrepreneurial. And so they were charged and they were convicted. Just recently, when I was out there a couple of weeks ago, the story was in the paper, they were convicted, and the California Charter Schools Association, which is very politically powerful, entered an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, on their behalf, and said they cannot be convicted because the state laws that govern public schools don't govern charter schools, because charter schools are not public schools. Now, how many times do you want to hear this before you finally say charter schools are not public schools? Every time there's a question that has come up before any court, any federal agency, any state agency, charter schools say we are not public schools. And that's why we don't have to obey the state labor laws. We can discipline kids differently. We can kick kids out. We can exclude kids we don't want. We can disobey the federal IDEA law and not accept kids with disabilities, on and on. And there's a lot of risk involved in going this route. Moody's Investors just put out a report this past week saying that there were certain cities that had structural weaknesses where the charter sector was literally sucking the life out of public education. That in a city like New York, for example, we have a very thriving economy. It's not killing public education in New York. Fortunately, at least as of this moment, you have a cap in Massachusetts. It's not killing Massachusetts. Lift the cap and let's see what happens. Moody's Investors said that cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Cleveland, public education has been destroyed by charter schools. That's something to think about when you vote and decide who is most likely to lift the cap. It's funny that I just got an email the other day that Idaho has suddenly, a very wealthy foundation there, very wealthy family, has decided that what Idaho needs most of all is charters. Can you imagine a rural state that has only 2 cities, and we wouldn't even consider Boise or Pocatello to be cities by, at least not by my standards. I live in New York City, with the whole state of Idaho could fit in my borough. But here's a state with a lot of tiny communities, tiny towns and villages, and they are bringing in the heavy guns to build charter schools, for-profit schools, and a lot of money behind it. It's crazy. And I might add, on the subject of charter schools, that our Secretary of Education announced in the last day or so that he's chosen a new undersecretary. That's the number 2 position in the U.S. Department of Education. The undersecretary will be Ted Mitchell. Ted Mitchell is the CEO of something called the New Schools Venture Fund. And I don't know how familiar you are with the New Schools Venture Fund. It is the leading organization to fund charter schools in America. It raises millions and millions of dollars from venture capitalists to create both for-profit and nonprofit charters and other kinds of entities to suck money out of the public school system. He will now be the number 2 official in the U.S. Department of Education. Now, the other hoax of our time is vouchers. The important thing you should know about vouchers is there has never been a state in the United States that has voted in favor of vouchers. And yet there are 17 states today that have voucher programs. All of them enacted by legislatures, not by the people. The city that has had vouchers the longest is Milwaukee. Milwaukee has had vouchers since 1990, and so that's 23 years, a good long run. The Milwaukee voucher schools didn't take the state test until a couple of years ago, and at that time we learned that the poor kids in the Milwaukee schools had exactly the same scores as the poor kids in the Milwaukee public schools, and the same scores as the poor kids in the Milwaukee charter schools. So here you have a demonstration of the corporate reform dream: competition, charters, vouchers, and poor kids doing poorly in all 3 sectors, the public money divided into 3 sectors, only 1 sector of which is required to have certified teachers. But what happened in Milwaukee, other than having 3 sectors? In 2009, Milwaukee decided to participate in the NAEP for urban school districts. And it turns out that Milwaukee is one of the lowest performing cities in the country. It's slightly ahead of Detroit. So there were no gains for Milwaukee as a city. Competition did nothing to improve the public schools. It did nothing to help the poor kids who went to voucher schools, except that the voucher schools have become politically so powerful that there are schools where only 5% of the kids are proficient, and these schools have not been held accountable by having been closed, as public schools are closed. And the governor, Scott Walker, is so impressed with the failure of vouchers that he wants more people in Wisconsin to have them. And so he's extended the voucher program with the help of his compliant legislature to a larger geographical district and raised the income cap so that even more people can be in failing voucher schools. So another hoax of our time derives directly from the experience of Arne Duncan in Chicago, and that is that closing schools makes better schools. Now, closing schools does nothing for children who can't speak or read English. When their school is closed, they still can't speak or read English. When children have needs, those needs should be addressed. What closing schools does, and you see this in any state that actually has communities, is that it decimates communities, as it's decimated communities in Chicago. Mayor Rahm Emanuel recently decided to double down on the Arne Duncan strategy and close 50 public schools. He will go down, in my view, in infamy as the mayor who closed more schools at one fell swoop than any other person in American history. And Chicago, by the way, is still one of the lowest performing cities in the country, and yet it's being used as the model for the nation. So, another hoax: if kids can't pass the test, make it harder. That's an extremely popular hoax these days. It makes a lot of sense. You know, it's like saying if you have a barrier and it's a 4-foot high barrier and some kids can't clear the bar, you just raise it higher. Well, you know what's going to happen. More kids will fail. So we're into part of this era that we're in is the idea that we can solve education problems through the use of big data, big data. And so you don't ever have to actually go into a school to know if it's good or bad. You just close it because the numbers don't look right. One of the things I learned about big data recently was I got an editorial from a friend who lives in Meridian, Mississippi. I've been very fortunate as being someone who's very active on the internet. I have friends all over the country that I've never met. I have a very good friend in Meridian, Mississippi, whom I've never met. He's the Ford dealer in Meridian, and he's devoted to the local public schools. And for some reason, and it has to do with the politics of Meridian, Mississippi, he was invited to join the editorial board of the local newspaper. So he knew that the local newspaper had regularly been saying horrible things about the high school in Meridian, and he asked them if they would do one thing for him, and that was to go with him and visit the school. And they had been saying this school was violent, it had a score of C, it had a score of D, it was a bad school, the teachers must be bad, the principal must be bad. And they went to the school and came away and said, we met a very dedicated principal. We met teachers who were doing a terrific job. We saw kids who were well-behaved, attentive to their lessons. The building was very well cared for. And their eyes were open because they used their eyes. They saw the school, not just big data. It made a huge difference. That's one reason why I hate these A through F grading systems. They're totally stupid. I hope you never have an A through F grading system. There's not a state in this country that has a reliable A through F grading system. One of the other uses of big data that you may have heard about is a study done by something called the National Council on Teacher Quality. That said that every ed school in America is a terrible school. Interesting that they never actually visited an ed school. They just looked at the reading list. And they didn't like the reading list, so every ed school in America is bad. And that was on the cover of Newsweek magazine. It was done in collaboration with the NCTQ report. Now we have ed schools all over America saying, how can we please the NCTQ? What is the NCTQ? It's a right-wing political organization that was created at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute when I was a member of the board. It was created to destroy ed schools and is doing a damn good job of it. So that's another of the hoaxes of our time. Here's another hoax, NBloom. Ever heard of NBloom? NBloom is a big data idea. It's an organization created by the Gates Foundation, as is almost everything else in America these days. So Gates Foundation put up $100 million to collect children's data and to collect 400 different data points, identifiable by child, everything about their grades, test scores, discipline issues. I don't know how any child can have 400 data points, but they will have 400 data points in every child. The software is made by Wireless Generation, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Now, do you want your child's personal and confidential data in the hands of Rupert Murdoch? That's, in fact, what is happening. There are several states that have signed on. New York State has agreed to give its confidential student data to NBloom. There's a couple of communities in Massachusetts, and I forget the names of them, that have agreed to give student data and to be put on a cloud and managed by, what else? Amazon.com. I mean, can you imagine? What kind of a world is this? Okay, let it be the National Security Agency, but not Rupert Murdoch and Amazon.com. I think that there comes a time when you just have to say, no, I will not let this happen. I can't do this to my child. I can't let them do it with my grandchild. So another of our giant hoaxes is this idea that testing is the best way to measure quality. The standardized tests are absolutely the best way to measure school quality, teacher quality, and student quality. This I can tell you from my 7 years on the NAEP board is a total hoax. What testing reflects is the family income and family education of the child. It reflects opportunity to learn and not capacity to learn. And to show you how crazy all of this is, there is such a demand for testing that I learned recently from a parent that her child, she discovered at the age of 3 is autistic, has been working very hard to keep up with his peers. And now he's in 2nd grade or 3rd grade, and the state says this child must take the same test as everyone else. And the child took the test and was told that he failed. And she said all this work to build up his self-confidence, his ability to be one of the group, to feel like he was okay, was destroyed. Why is this a good use of testing? I don't understand that. But there's an even worse story, which I learned from a principal in New York State, about a child whose parents learned a year ago that he has a rare genetic disorder and that he won't live long. So when they got this news, he was in 3rd grade. This year he's in 4th grade, and the child is blind and deaf. And the children in the school are very kind, and they guide him around. And the state wants the principal to explain why the child cannot take the test. He only has a few months to live. Why can't he take the test? I think this is indicative of how crazy the society has become, how there are people who actually, I think, hate childhood. There was a book that came out a few years ago called Childism, and it's about a society that doesn't love its children. And it used No Child Left Behind and behavior of this kind, which the author didn't yet know about, as examples of childism, of not loving children. But the biggest hoax of all the hoaxes is this idea that school choice is the civil rights issue of our time. And this is the siren song that turns parents into consumers and that says, you're not a citizen, you're a consumer. Citizens recognize that they have a responsibility for the common good. Citizens recognize that part of their responsibility is to pay for a police department, even if they don't ever need a police department to come to their home. Citizens recognize that they pay for the fire department, even if they don't ever have a fire. Citizens recognize that we have public beaches, public libraries, public parks, public schools. Even if their own children go to a private school or religious school, even if they have no children at all, it is their civic obligation to support public education. It's part of the commons. So where we are heading now, because of the very aggressive and entrepreneurial nature of the charter sector is towards having a dual system, two publicly funded systems. One publicly funded system can choose the students it wants and expel those it doesn't want, and the other publicly funded system accepts everyone and is considered a dumping ground, and that's public education. That's wrong. We can't go that way. So, having reviewed some, though not all, of the hoaxes of our time, there are many more, I want to talk about the realities of our time. Children start off in life with different advantages and disadvantages, and it's an obligation of society to level the playing field. Schools can help, but they can't do it alone. Teachers make a huge difference, and they can't do it alone. There is an achievement gap that exists on the first day of school. It starts long before children arrive in school because they're exposed to differential opportunities and vocabulary and learning experiences. And so I have a series of recommendations in the book, all of which are based on research, all of which are heavily footnoted. And I begin with a life course proposal, and that is that every woman in this society, every poor woman in this society, should have access to high-quality prenatal care. And you might well wonder, well, what's that got to do with education? It's got everything to do with education. Women who do not get prenatal care tend to have children. Well, they don't tend to, but they may more frequently than others have children with developmental deficiencies, cognitive delays, children who will require special education for many years and who will not have a full life because their mother was not able to afford prenatal care. Now, as it happens, the United Nations in the March of Dimes completed a survey a little over a year ago, and they rated 184 nations in the world as to the quality of prenatal care available to the women in their society. We came in number 131. We were tied with Somalia. So when you hear someone like Michelle Rhee say we were number 14 on some meaningless test of bubbling in math and science or reading questions, we were number 131 out of 184 nations in making sure that our children are born healthy. That's sinful. We should have early childhood education, starting at a very early age. The Economist magazine, a conservative magazine, rated 45 countries in terms of their provision of high-quality early childhood care, not just babysitting or daycare, but high-quality early childhood education. Out of 45 nations, we were rated number 34. What we know from research is that when children are struggling to learn in the early grades, they need reduced class sizes. They need small groups. They shouldn't be in classes of 25 or 30 when they can't, and not get the help that they need. That's research-based. All children should have a full and rich curriculum. All children should have the arts. And as we pour more and more resources into testing and test prep, the first thing to go is the arts, and that's a sin against children. All children should have physical education every day. I don't want any public official to lecture about childhood obesity unless they're prepared to advocate for daily physical education. Children, of course, should have history and literature, science and mathematics and foreign languages. They should have all of these things. Children also need medical care. Many children never see a dentist, never see an eye doctor, never have their hearing tested because their parents can't afford it. If Bill Gates or Eli Broad or the Walton family actually wanted to lower the achievement gap immediately, they would open a health clinic next to every poor school in this country. Every school should have a school nurse every day. Just 2 weeks ago, a 12-year-old child died in a Philadelphia public school of an asthma attack. It was the day that the nurse wasn't on. They only have a nurse 2 days a week because of the budget cuts. Had there been a nurse there, she would be alive today. That's a sin on the part of our society. We need wraparound services. We need parent education. Parents need the help. We need school psychologists. We need social workers. We need librarians. We need libraries. We need after-school programs. We need summer programs. There are people who say we can't afford this. We could just skip the next war. We could afford it. Having lived for 12 years under mayoral control of education, I have become a convert to the belief in democratic control of schools. No one mayor is wise enough or has time enough to run the school system. Mayoral control is wrong. People should be close to their neighborhood schools. People should have neighborhood schools, and the schools should be controlled by election, so that if you don't like the school board, vote them out, and if you like them, vote them back in. Charter schools should work in collaboration with public schools to meet the needs of children. Charters should be for the children who are not making it in public schools. That was the original idea of charters when it was first proposed in 1988. The charters would work with public schools. They would be for the children who were dropouts. They would be for children who were autistic. They would be for children who had tuned out and were not learning for whatever reason. They would work with the public schools to find better ways to do things. They would share their secrets. They would not boast and say, our scores are higher than your scores and we want your building. The idea was collaboration and not competition. The most important thing we need to do in our society is to reduce poverty. It's not impossible. The Washington Post just reported the other day that in the South and in the West, 50% of school children now live in poverty. This is not the America that I grew up in. I don't understand it. How is it that there are people who can go out to dinner and order a bottle of wine that costs $1,000 while other people don't have food on the table at all? That makes no sense. There's something terribly wrong here. Somehow I think that so much of our discussion about school reform, where we have some of the great financial wizards of our time trying to open their own schools and put their names on schools, it's a great distraction. It's a great distraction from the inequality in our society that's become a cancer on our society. It's so wrong. We should be talking about that, and we're not talking about it. It should be on our agenda. In Massachusetts, you could do something about it. Raise the minimum wage.